Hello, my name is Jim Valentine, and my subject matter today is Ellen G. White and spiritualism. Now, Ellen G. White was the founding prophetess, if you will, of the Seventh-day Adventist movement. And when William Miller's 1843 and 1844 dates came up, she and her soon-to-be husband, James White, she was Ellen Harmon, before she and her soon-to-be husband, James White, were followers of Miller and quite invested in his prophetic speculation, if you will. After his 1844 prophecy failed, Mr. Miller was wise enough to get out of the prophecy business. I believe he repented, and I suspect we will be seeing him in heaven. However, people that hung on to his prophetic speculation, many of them, I think, have gotten themselves in real trouble, including James and Ellen White. Just a little information from the Adventists themselves regarding Ellen White's position in the movement, if you will. Ellen G. White has undoubtedly been the most influential Seventh-day Adventist in the history of the church. She and her husband James provided strong leadership as the church was founded and organized. Her personal presence in her writings did much to shape and guide Adventism. Her counsel and insights continue to direct the Adventist church. Today, millions look to her writings for guidance and motivation. And in their official 28 fundamental beliefs, number 18 has to do with the spirit of prophecy, which is her writings. Spirit of prophecy is a continuing and authoritative source of truth for the church. So, now Ellen, from, shall we say, about 1849 on, taught against spiritualism or spiritism. And of course she had a lot of biblical warrant for this, and at least much of her teachings against spiritism or spiritualism were quite biblical. This just kept coming up in her public speaking and writing. And then we get up to the point in 1881 when her husband died. 5 weeks after her husband died, she wrote a letter. And this particular book is a Christian book by an ex-Adventist pastor, Whitewashed, Uncovering the Myths of Ellen G. White, Second Revision. I had earlier edition of this book. I heard that this new edition had come out and that there was a very important brand new chapter in this book. So I got my own copy of the book, found the brand new chapter. The brand new chapter is titled, Do God's True Prophets Take Advice from the Dead? So I quickly read the chapter. I read about a letter and extensive quotes from a letter that she wrote to her son, her favorite son, Willie C. White, 5 weeks after her husband's death. And I read that letter and I went, whoa, my eyes got wide. I've got to get the original on this, and so I can make photocopies and spread them around, if you will. So I looked in Sidney's book here for the reference, and it says, you may verify this letter in Arthur White's book, Ellen G. White, The Retirement Years, pages 161 to 162. And so I run to my library. I'm looking for Arthur White's book, Ellen G. White. Well, I couldn't find it there. And I searched all of Arthur White's books that I had, and then I started looking at bibliographies that covered Arthur White's material, and I discovered he never wrote such a book. What do I do now? I go back and look at it, and okay, I'm going to redirect my looking a little bit here. And I discovered, by the grace of God, this book, The Retirement Years by Ellen White herself. Now, this is actually a compilation that the White estate published in 1990, I believe. Yes, 1990, the White estate put out this book, The Retirement Years, which indeed has that letter in it. And then I found another source for the letter that was also published in 1990, and this was Manuscript Releases. Now, the Adventist published a 21-volume set titled Manuscript Releases. And this was in volume 10, page 38 to 40, which was and published in 1990. We will read the letter, and I will comment on the letter, and then I will comment on Ellen White's public teachings from the writing of that letter up until her death in 1915. And I think the problems will come with great clarity. And also, I have copies of the letter that I'm going to be reading for you here, word for word. I have these copies for each one of you. So if anybody has to leave early, signal that you need one of these things. Otherwise, as soon as I finish up, everybody will get one. Okay, page 161 through page 163 in the book The Retirement Years. Ellen dreams of James shortly after his death. And in the Manuscript Releases thing, everything's the same except there's one word not in there, and that word shortly. It's Manuscript Releases, page 3840. Ellen dreams of James after his death. The letter is word for word the same. Okay, Ellen dreams of James shortly after his death. A few days since, and she's writing to her son Willie C., a few days since I was pleading with the Lord for light in regard to my duty. Okay, now what's she referring to there? She was pleading with the Lord for light regarding her duty. In other words, what she's supposed to do. Well, at this point in her history, the male leaders of Seventh-day Adventism had requested that she come to a conference, appear at the conference and speak. And she had done this many times, and she did it after this too. But this particular time, she didn't want to go to the conference. There's some thought that she didn't want to go to the conference because she thought that she might, the male leaders might take her aside with some criticism or whatever. But anyway, she did not want to go to this conference. She didn't want to travel. She didn't want to speak there or anything. So she was looking for a way out. She was looking for a way to refuse going to the conference. So she says, in the night, I dreamed I was in the carriage, driving, sitting at the right hand. Father is a reference to her late husband, the one that died 5 weeks earlier and was already underground. Father was in the carriage, seated at my left hand. He was very pale, but calm and composed. Now, of course, when you've been dead 5 weeks and you're in the ground, you have a good excuse for being very pale. But that's my little commentary on there. But anyway, he was very pale, but calm and composed. Why, Father, I exclaimed, I am so happy to have you by my side once more. I have felt that half of me was gone. Father, I saw you die. I saw you buried. Has the Lord pitied me and let you come back to me again and we work together as we used to? He looked very sad. He said, the Lord knows what is best for you and for me. My work was very dear to me. We have made a mistake. We have responded to urgent invitations of our brethren to attend important meetings. We had not the heart to refuse. These meetings have worn us both more than we were aware. Our good brethren were gratified, But they did not realize that in these meetings we took upon us greater burdens than at our age we could safely carry. They will never know the result of this long-continued strain upon us. God would have had them bear the burdens we have carried for years. Our nervous energies have been continuously taxed, and then our brethren misjudging our motives and not realizing our burdens have weakened the action of the heart. I have made mistakes, the greatest of which was in allowing my sympathies for the people of God to lead me to take work upon me which others should have borne. Now, Ellen, calls will be made as they have been, desiring you to attend important meetings, as has been the case in the past. But lay this matter before God and make no response to the most earnest invitations. Your life hangs, as it were, upon a thread. You must have quiet rest, freedom from all excitement and from all disagreeable cares. We might have done a great deal for years with our pens on subjects the people need that we have had light upon and can present before them, which others do not have. Thus you can work when your strength returns, as it will, and you can do far more with your pen than with your voice. He looked at me appealingly and said, You will not neglect these cautions, will you, Ellen? Our people will never know under what infirmities we have labored to serve them because our lives were interwoven with the progress of the work. But God knows it all. I regret that I have felt so deeply and labored unreasonably in emergencies, regardless of the laws of life and health. The Lord did not require us to carry so heavy burdens, and many of our brethren so few. We ought to have gone to the Pacific coast before and devoted our time and energies to writing. Will you do this now? Will you, as your strength returns, take your pen and write out these things we have so long anticipated and make haste slowly? There is important matter which the people need. Make this your first business. You will have to speak some to the people, but shun the responsibilities which have borne us down. Well, said I, James, you are always to stay with me now, and we will work together. Said he, I stayed in Battle Creek too long. I ought to have gone to California more than 1 year ago, but I wanted to help the work and institutions at Battle Creek. I have made a mistake. Your heart is tender. You will be inclined to make the same mistakes I have made. Your life can be of use to the cause of God. Oh, those precious subjects the Lord would have had me bring before the people, precious jewels of light. Then she goes on to say, I awoke, but this dream seems so real. Now you, referring to her son Willie, now you can see and understand why I feel no duty to go to Battle Creek for the purpose of shouldering the responsibilities in General Conference. I have no duty to stand in General Conference. The Lord forbids me. That is enough. And this was letter number 17, 1881. So she took the demonic apparition of her late husband's words to be words from the Lord. And she wrote this to her son Willie, basically kind of, well, not only exulting in this dream, but almost bragging about it, if you will. So let's go to some scripture and the subject of the Old Testament on Spiritism. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 31. Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. Leviticus chapter 20, verse 6. I will set my face against the person who turns to mediums and spiritists to prostitute himself by following them, and I will cut him off from his people. Leviticus 20:27. A man or woman who is a medium or spiritist among you must be put to death. Ooh, that's Old Covenant. Then there's Deuteronomy 18, verses 9 through 11.
What was that reference again? Deuteronomy
Deuteronomy 18, verses 9 through 11, and I'm going to be reading that here. Okay, Deuteronomy 18, verses 9 through 11. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. Okay, then we proceed on to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 28, verses 3 through 19, and I'm going to read that a little bit selectively. But okay, 28:3. Okay, 28 verse 3. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritists. So Saul, basically under the instruction of God via Samuel, had removed the spiritists and the mediums from the land. Okay, then verse 4, we have the Philistines gathering. And verse 5, Saul saw the camp of the Philistines. He was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, "Seek for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." And his servants said to him, "Behold, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor." In other words, Saul previously had, followed God's instructions and basically outlawed mediums. But then he gets himself in a situation. The Philistines are coming, and this looks bad, and I want to consult the Lord. Well, but unfortunately, he'd got himself out of communication, if you will, with God by this point, and he didn't get an answer. So there's Saul dead and everything, and so he goes looking for a medium. Then Saul disguised himself by putting on other clothes and went, he and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night, and he said, "Conjure up for me, please, and bring up for me whom I shall name to you." But the woman said to him, "Behold, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off those who are mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you then laying a snare for my life to bring about my death?" Then Saul vowed to her by the Lord. Whoa, Saul's getting himself on real shaky grounds now. He vowed to her by the Lord, saying, "As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing." Well, seems like there was much punishment that came to Saul, but that's reading ahead. Then the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" And he, that is Saul, said, "Bring up Samuel for me." Then, verse 12, when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, "Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul." The king said to her, "Do not be afraid, but what do you see?" And the woman said to Saul, "I see a divine being coming up out of the earth." And he said to her, "What is this, his form?" And she said, "An old man is coming up, and he is wrapped with a robe." And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did homage. Then Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" And Saul answers, "I was greatly distressed, for the Philistines are waging war against me, and God has departed from me, and no longer answers me, either through prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have called you, that you may make known to me what I should do." And Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has departed from you and has become your adversary?" the Lord has done accordingly as he spoke through me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor, to David. As you did not obey the Lord and did not execute his fierce wrath on Amalek, so the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will also give over Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines. Therefore, tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. In other words, tomorrow you and your sons will be dead. Indeed, the Lord will give over to the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. Okay, then we move on to 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 24, where Josiah, a reference to King Josiah, got rid of the mediums and spiritists, which is part of the reason why King Josiah is honored as one of the few good kings from those days. Very short list of good ones. He got on the list through getting rid of the mediums and spiritists and doing other things that God wanted him to do. Then Isaiah chapter 8, verse 19. God speaking, "Why consult the dead on behalf of the living?" Why consult the dead on behalf of the living? Implication there is you're not supposed to be doing that. And then there's Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 3, regarding false prophecy and dreamers of dreams, and so on. So, and Ellen knew these things from the Scripture. She did enough reading of the Scripture to be aware of these, and she had even used some of these references previously in publicly teaching against Spiritism. And she has this experience where she doesn't, you could say, well, it was just a dream. Maybe, maybe she wasn't looking for it. Well, when she woke up, she didn't immediately repent of it. She wrote about it in a very positive way to her son. But then that was private, and, she didn't go around telling this in her public talks after this. So, okay, then, well, what did happen later on in her ministry? She continued after this event. She went back to, in her public talks and writings, denouncing Spiritism. And one really classic example of that is her book Patriarchs and Prophets, which came out in 1890. And this is the first of her 5 volumes Conflict of the Ages series. Patriarchs and Prophets basically covers the first half of the Old Testament. You might say it's kind of her commentary on the first half of the Old Testament. And in there, on page 683 through page 689, she has an entire chapter titled here, Ancient and Modern Sorcery. But the whole thrust of this chapter is against Spiritism or spiritualism. And she goes into great detail denouncing it and quotes some of those references. And this, in smaller portions, happened right up until her death in 1915. So now, okay, little note here. Compare Saul's actions at Endor with Ellen's. Okay, Saul's actions, that was 1 Samuel 28, verses 3 through 19. But my observation is that Saul knew in advance that trying to communicate with the dead was wrong. He knew that in advance. Well, Ellen knew it in advance too, and Ellen preached against it. And 1 Samuel 28, verse 6, Saul wasn't getting the info he wanted. You know, he wanted news on what was going to happen with the Philistines, and of course he would prefer to hear news that things were going to go well for him and all that, but he was really, felt desperate for that news. Ellen wasn't getting the information that she wanted. She wasn't getting permission from God not to go to this conference or any other good excuse not to go to the conference. First line of the letter. Saul went ahead and sought info from a spirit. Went to a medium, gal that did this sort of thing for money, but was afraid because of Saul's recent edict. And Saul went to her and, promised her protection, basically promised her protection from God on this matter to get the information. Ellen went ahead and accepted information from a spirit, or a demonic spirit, and claimed that this information came from God the Father in heaven, and then acted upon it, and then went back to preaching against spiritism and spiritualism. Now, Ellen had a lot of visions, and she had a lot of dreams, and from these visions and dreams, which she felt came right from the throne of God, she put together all of her writing and all of her public teaching. Well, that's not quite correct. Some of her writing and public teaching she took from the Bible, but much of it came from the various dreams and various visions that she had. And in these visions in particular, she mentions a, quote, young man who gave her the information. And she sometimes just refers to him as a young man, and then sometimes she refers to him as God's angel, sometimes she refers to him as her guardian angel. I think from the record, both reading Scripture and reading her material, you would probably come to the conclusion that this, quote, young man or God's angel or guardian angel was a familiar spirit or a spirit guide.
It wasn't her husband James again in all these other dreams? It was
No.
some other person?
No. The other dreams and visions, I mean, she had all kinds of stuff, but I don't have any other references where James, supposedly gave her this information. So that's basically it. And what does this say regarding Ellen and her position, where her words, that the Adventists will always tell you, on the one hand, they'll tell you that she was divinely inspired with the same quality and level of inspiration as inspired, for example, Isaiah and Jeremiah in the Old Testament, and Paul and Luke and the boys, if you will, in the New Testament. They'll claim the same level and same quality of inspiration for her material, but then they will deny that they see her material on the same level as the Bible. Supposedly it's kind of a second level below the Bible. But there's, and you can say, well, that doesn't sound too righteous. Well, it's actually worse than that, because they agree that the Bible's inspired by God, and but then they claim the same type of inspiration and same level of inspiration for this allegedly somewhat lower, divine writings, if you will. However, if you read God's Word, and if you ask the Holy Spirit to assist you in understanding God's Word, And based on that, you give your opinion on a particular Bible verse, and your opinion, after reading God's inspired Word and asking the Holy Spirit for assistance there, if your interpretation of any particular verse in the Bible disagrees with her interpretation of that same verse, you're automatically wrong. So what that boils down to is operationally, practically speaking, operationally, her material is actually, a higher level of inspiration, if you will, than the Bible, effectively speaking. And this is the problem. Another part of the problem is the size of Seventh-day Adventism. Now, in one of the other workshops yesterday, we heard about Mormons and their claims about membership and some of the problems with their claims about membership. Well, even if their claims and membership were absolutely true, and the Mormons really had as many people as they say they had, Seventh-day Adventism is still ahead of them. And while I wouldn't hang my hat, and certainly not my salvation, on the absolute accuracy of the Seventh-day Adventism claims for numbers of people, they're a lot more reliable and a lot more honest than the Mormon claims. So we're dealing with an organization here that worldwide has roughly 1.1 million more people than the Mormons claim, which means a lot more people than the Mormons have. And we kind of miss that sometimes fairly easily because something like somewhere around 94% of the Seventh-day Adventists are not resident in either the U.S. or Canada, but they're spread all over the world. And quite frankly, in a lot of cases, their people around the world are eating the lunch, if you will, of missionaries that we send around the world, as well as in indigenous Christians in various countries around the world. Uganda, for example, huge problem with Seventh-day Adventism. Over in Kenya, they not only have the huge problem with Islam and witch doctors and so on, but they have a very significant problem with Seventh-day Adventism in Kenya, and this goes on around the world. In last couple of years, I've made 2 trips to India and worked in Punjab province, or Punjab state, which is northwestern India, up against the Pakistani border on the one side and up against Himalayan mountains on the other side. And before I went over the first time, we asked here from the U.S., asked the leader over there we were going to work with, okay, what are the biggest problems coming from the West, false teachings or cults coming from the West that have affected and infected Punjab province? Number one, oneness Pentecostalism. You and Mr. DeVore did a good work there. Oneness Pentecostalism, number 1. Number 2, Seventh-day Adventism. And a distant number 3, Jehovah's Witnesses. So I had a lot of teaching to do on those subjects there. But, and of course, there are all kinds of Seventh-day Adventists. There are Seventh-day Adventists that, believe it totally. There are Seventh-day Adventists that believe this and that, and there are Seventh-day Adventists that say they believe it totally, but they don't necessarily act like it, and there's so-called liberal Seventh-day Adventists, which are, people that take, have the family history of Seventh-day Adventism and take the name and all that, but their real beliefs are pretty much worldly and pretty much pagan, and so on and so on.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
What percent would you guess could you categorize as evangelical Any of them? You
Well, okay. Now, obviously, a lot there depends upon the definition of the word evangelical. There is a significant wing of Adventism, if you might say, possibly as high as 20%, possibly even as high as 25% of the Adventist population, that would be referred to as, quote, evangelical. And these are people that have at least a somewhat greater understanding of grace, you know, what the Bible is talking about when it talks about grace, than the classic teaching in Adventism. And I'm sure that some of those folks are born again, and I'm also sure that it's easier to be an active member of Adventism and be born again than it is to be an active member, say, of Mormonism and be born again. However, they use a lot of terms, the evangelicals especially use a lot of terms which sound absolutely wonderful to us, but they don't necessarily mean the same thing. In other words, I'm saying that 20 or 25% that might be classified as evangelical Adventists, some of them are born again, but no, I don't think anywhere near all of them. That, you know, my look at things, and talking with ex-Adventists that are born again, and so on and so on. And I've been working with a lot of ex-Adventists in recent years, both for purposes of helping them as well as for purposes of learning from them. Yes?
I have two questions. So when we were talking about how she thought that God was speaking to her in these dreams through this guardian angel, how would you respond to stories like how God spoke to Joseph, about him becoming, a great leader in Egypt, and how he spoke to, and how he was able to interpret all the dreams of
Okay, in other words, based on biblical history, can God, the one real legitimate God, give information through dreams or visions to historical personages? Well, yes, according to the Scripture, this has definitely happened. However, with Ellen White, the Bible had already made things clear on the question of spiritism, and of course the experience of Saul is one big point there. And Ellen claimed, basically, that the Lord had told her, in essence, that all of this was wrong, at least wrong now, like the Jehovah's Witnesses in New Light. But then afterwards, she went back to publicly teaching that this is wrong. I mean, this is, this is clearly not the mark of Jacob or Joseph or Isaiah or Jeremiah.
What about, like, in the New Testament, since, like, it was clear in the Old Testament that, using mediums and spiritists were absolutely not allowed, and therefore, if you have these types of events, you need to consider it of the devil. But in the New Testament, it talks about how an angel, like the angel Gabriel, came to Joseph or Mary or both. I have to reread the scripture on that one, but I can't remember if he came to them, one or both of them, during a dream, or they were awake, to tell them about the coming of Jesus, and that they were going to be his parents. So how would you respond to that?
But those events did nothing to violate Old Testament teaching and Old Testament history. You know, the Old Testament from Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 on, right up through Malachi, we're getting prophecies about a coming Messiah. And you know, Joseph and Mary got messages that indicated that they were going to have a very special child under very special circumstances, and then, you know, more than that. And while the New Testament doesn't go through a lot of references on the evils of Spiritism, I think particularly if you examine the book of Revelation and what the book of Revelation has to say about various occultic things, it's pretty clear that the New Testament is not about to give us a pass on these, you know, Spiritism that's been condemned both in the text and the history and everything of the Old Testament. Yes.
Well, I'll just add that the message that Mary got was directly from an angel, not from a dead person.
Right.
But White thought that this young man was her guardian angel.
But
yes,
still bring a message.
But those, right. But those were other messages, and this particular the Spiritism type thing, you know, she thought that it was James. James S. had come back, and she wanted him to stay, and if he couldn't stay, she wanted him to keep coming back repeatedly.
Yeah, I mean, that part I can understand.
Wait a minute. Yeah.
But it's the part where she doesn't know who this person is. She thinks it's an angel.
Right. Okay. In her, shall we say, her whole run-of-the-mill, you know, actually they have claimed that she had 2,000 visions, and apparently that's a big exaggeration. Looking at the records, we see that she claimed a lot of visions, but she didn't claim anywhere near the 2,000 that are claimed for her now. So she had all these other, quote, visions and dreams, many of which, but not all of which, was this quote, young man that she sometimes just described as a young man. Sometimes she described him as her guardian angel. Sometimes she described him as you know, one of God's angels. Well, based on the information that she received, it's pretty clear that it wasn't those experiences weren't all that positive. And that goes through just a whole range of her teaching. Whereas this today we're talking about one specific thing here, and where allegedly James showed up. But wait a minute, this is going right back to Saul's error, if you will.
Okay, is it considered Spiritism when Elijah and Moses came and visited Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration in Matthew 17?
Yeah, I mean, these were clearly not demonic appearances. No, I don't know. Steve, there was no Old Testament prophecy in advance about this event coming, was there?
That's an interesting question that he's asking. But
Yeah.
All I keep thinking is that Jesus said he's the God of the living, not of the dead.
Right.
And so in
Right.
one sense, even the Old Testament saints were alive, but they were in another realm.
Right.
And
And
they crossed over to our realm. We didn't try to communicate to them in their realm.
right. And when the apostles recorded this event, they didn't record any messages from Moses or Elijah. They just, felt they saw Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus, but they didn't record any new doctrine or new revelation or anything that had allegedly come from these appearances. That's another point that I think has some significance.
And if they did have a message, we would have to test it.
Right.
Because that's what the prophet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Again, it would have to be tested, to the rest of Scripture. So, yeah.
What about how the Catholics pray to the saints? and the fact that, these are people who, died in service to the church, dead, but they feel like, oh, well, this person, the Mother Mary can advocate on my behalf, to God. Is that considered
Well,
spiritual?
okay, couple of things here. Couple of things. They use, well, particularly with regard to Mary, they use the argument, well, Mary was Christ's mother. Therefore, she's in a position, to get some, either put a little pressure on him or to give us or give somebody something, or wheedle him until he does it, so on and so on. And here they're thinking in terms of human society terms, and the way mom can get things out of you maybe easier than somebody else could. And so they're making that appeal. And with regard to, quote, the saints, if you will, they're kind of making an appeal to, like Hebrews chapter 11 and the talk, and I don't know if it's all in 11 or some in 10 too, about the great cloud of witnesses regarding the saints, talking about the saints basically, seeing some things that are going on in the world now. Those scriptures are certainly there, but there is no biblical basis for praying to the saints for any favors, or praying to Mary specifically, the Mother of God, if you will, for any favors. We're told to pray to the Father. We can pray in the name of Jesus. We can, in fact, it's not commonly done, but I don't know of any biblical warrant against praying to the Holy Spirit. And most of the time we tend to pray to the Father in the name of Jesus, but we can pray to Jesus directly. We can pray to the Father. We can pray to the Holy Spirit. But you get into praying to any other person, even if they're fairly exalted person, if you will, like Mary. And I think we as Protestants sometimes, whereas Catholics and to a certain extent the Eastern Orthodox, I believe, do too much elevating of Mary. I think sometimes we're guilty of too much downgrading of her. I mean, we shouldn't pray to her. We shouldn't expect her to wheedle any favors for us from Jesus or from the Father or anybody else. But we do need to remember she was a really special gal. I mean, when God picked her for her job, if you will, there were a whole lot of other gals he could have picked, but he picked her. And when Jesus was on the cross, he gave John a pretty important assignment. Take care of my mom. And, an apostle gets an assignment like that. I mean, Mary was a really special gal. And as Protestants, sometimes we kind of forget that a little bit, or at least downgrade her a little bit. But on the other hand, this business of elevating her to an intermediary between us and God, or an intercessor, it doesn't fly. Timothy is told that there's just one mediator, and that's Jesus Christ. And,
Jim, what's always interested me about
and the Catholics do indeed need to realize that. Unfortunately, the vast majority of them don't, but they need to realize that. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was just thinking, when I look at the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, they had successors. The Mormons still believe you have to have a present-day prophet. Mm-hmm. LNG seems they never moved on. and got a replacement for him.
Right. There has been controversy within the church on whether they should ever expect another an Ellen Mod 2 or not. And there's different feelings on that within the church. And there have been historically, there have been some claims on the part of some people that they were, basically Ellen Mod 2. And those things, you check them out, and they have all fallen on their face. But then Ellen's record is not as great as, of course, they would, many of them believe, and all of them would have you believe. Now, just a little advertisement, if you will, for the future. My next project, unless the Lord does something to change this, my next project in terms of coming up with a new presentation on Seventh-day Adventism is going to take some of my old work on Ellen's teaching on perfectionism and the fact that it's a possibility for humans. In fact, there's a number of quotes where she makes it a requirement for Christians to 100% stop sinning, and so on and so on. And this comes up in her book, The Great Controversy. There are 2 quotes in there where Jesus stops interceding for us, allegedly, and we have to stand before a holy God in our own righteousness. Now, of course, that's all blasphemy. It's all false. But I've dug out a lot of Ellen quotes on that. But my next chore is to take 2 prominent current Adventists, one very prominent historian and prominent theologian and still alive, and the other one somewhat prominent, longtime pastor, Adventist pastor still alive, and both of whom have written multiple books, and to take their own words on the negative effects, sometimes disastrous effects, on Ellen's perfectionism teaching on them. And both of them have, quote, discovered grace, but I maintain they didn't discover grace all that perfectly because they're still within the Adventist system. But at least they gave up on, trying to become sinless. And so I want to kind of tell the story of the destructive effects of that perfectionism teaching in their own words. So, upcoming project. Yes.
Joseph Smith used to get very convenient prophecies, revelations that helped him whenever he had a personal problem. Mm-hmm. Is it possible, just as looking at it from another perspective, rather than her claims revealing demonic forces, is it possible that she, because she's going to make things up, Ellen plagiarized her, is it possible that she just conveniently made up these stories to give herself cover why she didn't go to these conventions? I'll just whip up the story and that'll give me cover for why I don't want to go. Is it possible it's just made up?
Well, there are certain situations, and I can't give you any nice crystallized examples right now, but I believe there are certain situations through her history where some of that happened. She kind of threw out an excuse or something. In this case, though, I believe that there was really something demonic going on, because she laid this out to Willie, and now she threw out excuses and so on, but to share something like this with Willie, who was the favorite among her sons, and who became in her later life, it became her number 1 assistant and all. I think there really had to be something demonic going on here and all, because I just don't think she would have made anything that up and thrown it out as an excuse, like I believe she probably did in some other cases. Okay, well, thank you for your presence and attention and all. One little note here. This Rose Publishing tract on Adventism is quite a lot of information in a small space, and you may be familiar with some of the other Rose Publishing materials and their quality. These things retail for $3.99. When we buy them in small bulk, if you will, we have to pay $3 a piece for them. When we buy them in large bulk, we have to pay $2 a piece for them. But today, up until whenever I go tonight, you guys or anybody else here at the convention can get them for $1 a piece. And can't do any better than that for you. Losing money there, but I do want to get them out. So just a note on that. And again, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.